Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on Time's flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandy Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Books can open portals to realms far beyond the ordinary, where dragons show up as teachers, leprechauns whisper ancient secrets, and elementals, hybrids, and high beings share the mysteries of human existence. Some say these stories are mirrors to our subconscious desire for magic and transformation. But for today's guest, they're much more than stories. They're very real encounters with realms and beings that challenge the boundaries of what we believe is possible. Tanis Helliwell is a spiritual transformation teacher, a mystic and author who's presented at conferences alongside such luminaries as Rupert Sheldrake, Matthew Fox, Gregg Braden, Barbara Marx Hubbard, Fritjof Capra, Jean Houston, and many more. She joins me now to share some of her extraordinary encounters chronicled in her fascinating series of books that illuminate a world where the magical and the mystical is not just symbolic, but profoundly real. She's also going to bring us up to date on the latest cosmic changes. Tanis Helliwell, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Sandy. Was looking forward to this.
It's good to see you again. So dragons, high beings, leprechauns and hybrids. I mean, people would say high fantasy and fairy tales, but you've been having real encounters with angels and elementals and master teachers in higher dimensions since childhood. Do you recall your very first encounter?
I think that probably my first encounter was before I was even born. I remember hovering above the earth and a being with me, a guide that was asking me, are you ready to go back? And are you prepared to go back? And said, yes, I am. But it was an agreement. It wasn't you have to go do this. It was an agreement. And then I remember her creating a pathway for me, and that I looked down and I saw my mother. Like I just actually saw my mother, and I thought, now is the time to enter into my mother. And then I did that. And it wasn't at conception. A lot of people say, well, do we enter at conception or later on? And it was around the 8th month that I actually entered her. I'm a psychotherapist by training, Sandy, and I used to take people to look at before they actually entered their mother and why did they choose their parents and what was their purpose. And I found that most people don't enter until later. So my experience wasn't unusual. So that being in those other realms was my first experience. And then when I was born, when I actually was born, I felt myself being born, and the terrible brightness of the lights of the operating room. And I remember my first thought was, this is going to be more difficult than I had imagined. That was my first thought.
Did you have any inkling before you came in or soon after, any remembrance of what you came to do?
I think I went into a kind of hiatus for a very short period of time, a numbness. But I remember coming to again when I was in a high chair and I was crying, and I imagined because I had diaper rash, and I was crying, and my mother was so fearful that she was going to get evicted because the place where she was living with my father, the agreement was that they didn't have any children. And my mother had been a working mother, a working person before she became a mother, and they didn't want children. I was an accident after 7 years. So I knew all of this. I knew her fears when I was in her womb, that she didn't really want me. She didn't want to be pregnant. It wasn't me personally. She was just terrified of what this was going to mean in her life. And then I remember in this very early memory, her fear. And I remember that I had to be good for her. So I was more soul conscious than conscious as a child. I was going to mother her. I was going to care for her. And I'm only in a high chair. And from then on, I was conscious of this.
And you said that you had some experiences, but you couldn't tell people because you had a brother who was sent to a psychiatrist?
Yes. Yeah, he was 2 years younger than me, and he also was doing things, and he was sent to a psychiatrist to get fixed, and he never was quite the same afterwards. He shut down, he locked himself away. So I decided to keep everything secret that was happening to me. And even as a child, I could hear what other people were thinking, and I could tell the difference between what they were saying to me out loud and what they were thinking about me. And and I remember saying to one of my little child friends, "Why do you say that? And why do you think this other thing about me?" And then she was terrified of me. And this other girl we were with was also, who used to like me, was also terrified of me. And my great fear in my whole life has been abandonment. And everyone works with one kind of key fear in their life, right? And that has been mine. So that was triggered very early. And so I decided to keep very quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at the dinner table, Sandy, when I tried thinking one thing at my parents and saying something else, I realized they could not tell the difference. So then I realized no adult could help me.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you've said that in your years you started glimpsing past lives, but you still, I imagine at that age, did not have an inkling what lay in store for you.
No. No. I had one of those near-death experiences, which I didn't even talk about until this last 10 years. But I had a near-death experience when I was 19. And I was hanging by a rope tow. I was skiing, and the power didn't cut off, and my scarf had wound itself around. So it went up by my neck, hanging by this rope tow. And as many people describe these experiences, all time almost stopped. It went very, very slowly. And I had complete clarity, and I had no fear, none. And I saw two paths. One was I could choose to go. I could choose to die right there, my neck being broken. And I saw my parents would be devastated. And I also saw this other path, and I heard clearly, you have a choice, but if you decide to stay, you won't be able to begin your real work until you're 28. So I put in time. I went to university, put in time studying, traveling to other countries, meeting other cultures, people, sacred sites always interested me, in all other countries. And yeah, but it was a conscious decision to stay.
Yeah. Now, you worked as a management consultant for banks, universities, government and medical organisations for over 40 years, which is very left-brained. What were you doing with the right brain during that period?
I often wondered, it was, I had two lives, truly. I mean, during my week my work week. Yes, that's what I was, working for IBM or banks or even forestry companies, as a consultant. And then on the weekends, I was leading past life regression workshops, healing workshops. I had traumas around it. It was not always easy. I became very well known for doing my past life regression work and was on like national TV and radio, regressing announcers and in, national papers. And then my corporate clients, almost all of them fired me because I had lost credibility. So for 1 decade, I didn't even have a calling card. I decided I would only take what the universe sent to me. And a whole bunch of corporate clients kept on coming. So the universe made it clear that I was supposed to stay in the corporate world as well as doing my tours to sacred sites and weekend work. And so I've always just done what comes to me. I don't push to try to do other than what comes. Yeah.
At that time in your life, were you talking to high beings? Were you communicating, or did that all come a little bit later after you went to Ireland?
No, I went to Ireland by the time I was in my early 30s. And by the time I was in my, early 30s, maybe 34, I had already become a successful consultant. I already had my house for a decade and I didn't feel like I wanted to do any of it anymore. I wanted to be enlightened. So I left my 16-year relationship, had the house up for sale, quit all my corporate work, and went to Ireland to become enlightened and ended up in a cottage occupied by a leprechaun family. So my summer of enlightenment definitely took a downturn, and I ended up working with elementals, even though they told me at the time, they said, we want you to write a book about the importance of elementals and how we want to work with human beings and be co-creators on the planet, but you have to write the book in a decade. So I returned to Canada. Once again, all these corporations wanted me. I went back to work. On weekends, I went back to doing my weekend spiritual workshops. And in a decade, I wrote the book.
Your first encounter with a family of leprechauns, how does one cope with that?
Well, I wasn't alone. I mean, I thought I was alone with it. But when I went down to the village, the next day after I'd had my, my introductory experience the night before, I went down the next day to get some groceries in. And I'm in the one store in this tiny little village, which it's the post office as well as the general store. It's the everything store. And I'm checking out my groceries, and the man says, so are you a holiday maker? And I said, well, I've rented the Douglas Cottage. Oh, the Douglas Cottage. Did you not know it's haunted? So I pretended like, no. So I said, oh, really? Haunted by what? He said, oh, haunted by the little people. He said, oh, you're living on a whole haunted lane. The locals don't even go up that lane at night.
Why not? Are they afraid of leprechauns?
Evidently, this cottage was called the Fairy Cottage. And it was, it was well known to the locals. And isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So they wanted you to write a book. And that did become The Summer with Leprechauns, a true story, yes?
Yes, it did. Yeah. And that was actually my second book. But yes, that became that story.
Yeah. What was the first book?
It was called Decoding Destiny. And I wrote it when I was only about early days, before I even went to Ireland, I was told by, you asked me the question, did you speak with other beings? And yes, I did. In my meditation, they were my only guides and friends. And so they told me I had to go into meditation and write a book one summer. And so it was called Decoding Destiny, Keys to Humanity's Spiritual Evolution. And yeah, it came out in 1988. I was in my 30s.
So what can you tell us about those keys?
It's an interesting book because people have asked me, is that channeled? And it is not, Sandy. Channels can sit here and the information comes down to them. But for me, it's I go up to the beings who are there talking. So it's like having a conversation with you. And even though I wrote the book because I was directed to do so, and there were 5,000 copies and they were sold and other people taught my book, I did not teach my own book until the year 2000. I didn't even start because I felt that although that information was valid, it had not come down through the various stages it needed to be anchored on the earth. And that I wasn't ready as a human being to be able to physically teach that book. And then it's about when I finally taught it, started to teach it in the year 2000, and I rewrote it in the year 2011. I brought it out again. I had exercises to help people. So the old way of writing in 1988 was more like Rudolf Steiner or Alice Bailey. It was old-fashioned. And I didn't even really like it. It was theoretically accurate, but it wasn't grounded in a concrete physical reality where people could take these keys and apply them in their life in ways that would change them. And that's what I wanted to do. So I talked about the various stages in human evolution. I talked about the various beings who were evolving on this planet even then. So it was a precursor to my work with elementals. It was a precursor to my work with dragons, to my book on hybrids. It was often we have fractals in our life, and that was sort of a precursor of the whole thing I was going to have to evolve in more detail. Have you found things like that would happen at earlier times in your life?
I don't really know. I mean, things happened. You don't take much notice. You just think it's your life and you just think that, somebody's introducing you to something. It's only when you get much older that you start seeing all the breadcrumbs in that, that they were all leading you as if you were cherry picking things to put in your pocket that you weren't going to know what you were going to do with them until much later. So looking back, I would say, yes, at the time, I was just, enjoying being curious.
Yes. Yeah, you see? So, and if people look at their lives, if you get to middle age and you look back at your life, I think most people would see that there are these recurring patterns and fractals that are showing them the way.
Yes.
And if they pay closer attention to those, that you become more conscious of what your actual purpose is in life.
Yes.
And so I think that's what it was. It was sort of like I was a bud in my at age 31 or 2 when I'm writing, I'm a bud. And this bud had to open.
Yes, yeah. It's a good way to describe it. I can certainly remember doing things and people would say, why are you doing that? That was so different and unusual and not the done thing in that particular arena. And I did them just because the idea had occurred to me. But now I can see the purpose for them. I can see where they were leading and what they were showing me about myself. Yeah.
Yes. And who knows how those ideas occur, you see.
Yes.
You said to me, were you talking to other beings? Well, I actually was talking to other beings. But for people who say, well, I wasn't talking to other beings, but maybe other beings are planting little seeds that we're picking up on.
Yes. Yes. I used to bemoan the fact that nobody spoke to me. I'd wake up other people and they'd be talking to angels and all sorts, and nobody spoke to me. But I've had, I would think, probably no more than 3 what I call downloads in my life. And they were very, very clear, as if somebody unfurled a picture in front of me, and I've never understood where they came from. But they were complete within themselves. Yeah.
Wonderful. And just as you said that, I got these shivers of rightness. And so some people get downloads. You had 3 of them. I have this, other thing, which is Tanis, do this. And I'm obedient and do it. And other people may just have subtle little hints. And they can either pick up on them and then their life goes in the right direction, or they can ignore them. And then I think they become more shut down.
Yes.
Their intuition dulls.
Yeah.
So if we pick up on those little hints, our intuition increases. And then we get more of them. And then our life starts to have synchronicities.
Yes. Yeah.
But we often have choice.
Yeah.
To apply it or not.
And we never know, what was it that made us go with that and make that choice. We don't know what was prompting us, but something clearly was. Tell me when, I've been reading your Dragons book, and I love it. And you're very obedient. When they ask you to do something, you do it. Why is that? Do you ever feel like saying no?
I often feel overwhelmed, and I sometimes feel I don't know if I can do a good job, right? Can I do this as well as it needs to be done? But the older I get, the less that bothers me. And I think that this insecurity that I had originally comes from the fact that in school, Sandy, I was not academically brilliant. So people have different gifts, and some people have natural sports gifts and they excel, and others have mathematical gifts and they excel. And I didn't have any gifts that academic life was going to reward. We do not get rewarded for being a mystic in our school system.
Yeah.
So having gone through our school system, it wasn't until I got to university and even into a master's program in university that I started getting better and better and better academically. And it was really because I could, as I went further in education, I became more like myself. And I could use my own intuition and my own special way of viewing things in greater detail, rather than trying to become what the system thought was going to be a success. And so I think that was where I gained confidence, was that the older I got, the more that I was being accepted and rewarded, if you like, for who I was. So now I really don't feel I have anything to prove at all to anyone.
Well, you have a wonderful relationship with the dragons. I mean, dragons are fearsome creatures, and, they're part of our mythology. I've always believed in dragons. I never believed that somebody had made them up. I felt there was some truth in that. But when you first were approached by dragons, were you frightened?
No, because I had had other experiences. I had had, You talked earlier about your downloads, these three major downloads.
Mm.
And I just wrote The Dragon's Tale. That's the name of the book, The Dragon's Tale, just this last year. But at least 30 years prior to that, I had one of those lucid dreams where I awoke in this cave and saw these pillars and a great boulder beside me, and wondered, how the heck did I get into this cave? And I walked to this great big opening, and I looked out and found out I was hundreds of feet above any ground. And there were dragons flying across my path of sight, all different colors, red and ruby and emerald. And then I looked back at these pillars, and I looked back at the boulder, and I realized those were dragon legs. And that was a dragon in an egg that was going to wake up. And then I awoke. But I awoke with this knowledge that I was being brooded by a dragon. And what the heck did this mean? That I'm in a dragon lair being brooded by a dragon. So I knew that there was this strong relationship, but I didn't know what it meant. So I didn't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. You say in A Dragon's Tale that the dragon Jake has said that you were, was it a nest sister? That you have dragon, is it dragon DNA? What would you call it?
Well, I talk about the fact that that many of us, if not all of us, I really don't know about all of us, but I sure do know about many of us, are actually hybrids. We humans think that we're, yellow, red, black, white, and that we all are 100% human, even though we're, just a little bit different color or something. And I do not think this is the case at all. I think there are these spiritual beings and evolutions that are interacting with humans, and not only on a mental sphere. Not only mentally are they interacting, or spiritually are they interacting, but that we may very well have been beings who have come from other planets, other solar systems, and that we are helping humanity and interacting with humanity, and in some way becoming a hybrid.
Mm.
And I don't know how that would be happening.
No, I mean, it's a curious one. It's very hard to get your head around, isn't it? That you could be anything other than what you are. I mean, even past life is difficult to get your head around.
Yeah, and I think that they're like what I found in my life, in my personal life, and that's all I can go on really. But when I talk about it, it rings true for others. That's what I've also noticed. And you mentioned that you always have felt this relationship, for example, with dragons. And what I've noticed is that when we start our conscious spiritual journey, I'll just call it the conscious one, we become interested usually in our own physical heritage, our own ancestors, our mother, father, grandparents, and what countries do they come from, and what qualities do they have. And that's our first look at something. But then when we go a little further into that journey, we often start having past life experiences. And then we say, not only is it this life that's important, but our past lives are impacting on this life and are influencing this life.
Yes.
And then after we unwrap that further, I have found there's this layer of who are we really? And once we get to the who are we really string, we are into hybrids.
Yeah.
Who is our soul? What is our soul really? Is really what it comes back to. And so that's what I've noticed for people. And that's why I wrote that one book, Hybrid, So You Think You're Human.
Human, yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people, they find that hard to believe. But I mean, the fact that we have two parents right there, we're a hybrid. Take that back further and further and further. And you look at, I mean, how many people's DNA do we have in here? How many other kinds of DNA do we have in here? It's a fascinating topic.
Well,
We're going to take a short break now, Tanis. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and my guest today is mystic, author, and founder of the International Institute for Transformation, Tanis Helliwell, who has seen and has heard elementals, angels, and master teachers in higher dimensions since childhood, and written many wonderful books about her experiences. We'll be back with more from Tanis Helliwell after this break. Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Times flagship radio show, What is Going On? And as an author, editor, and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who've walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees, and no BS. Just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these three levels: shadows, gifts, and cities. And the journey is through those three levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the city. And the cities are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Tanis Helliwell, For the last, 30, 40 years, we have seen an awful lot of science fiction as an incredibly popular genre, and also fantasy. You know, my children's generation grew up on the fantasy books, and of course, a lot about dragons. Do you think that we are being seeded, prompted with this information because, you know, dragons and other beings want to start communicating with us and have a relationship?
Absolutely. I believe that the Earth is going through a rebirth as a conscious planet, and that there are immense cosmic energies coming into the Earth right now, and that the ring of unconsciousness around the Earth is breaking open, and that these other evolutions, these star evolutions, beings who have evolved beyond where we currently are coming to help us. And so we are moving up into an astral frequency now, I think, Sandy, a higher frequency than we have been in previously. So some people are starting to see elementals. Many people have seen angels, right? Angels were the first ones that came into consciousness about 20 years ago. People started talking about angels, and then near-death experiences and UFOs. So these were the first kind of things that came into consciousness as other than our third dimensional reality. And from there, then elementals, that we have another race of beings on the planet that build all form. They build the trees and the plants and the water and the air, these elemental beings, and that they also, want to work with us. So, but elementals, here's the Earth frequency right here. Third dimensional reality is where most of us are conscious. And then here's the elementals and the angelic, some of the angels like Archangel Michael, quite close to the Earth. And then above that, you start getting myriad other worlds that are in other dimensions, that are in other frequencies. And the realm of the mer people, the mermaids, is an astral realm right about there. And then the dragon realm is very high. It's a very high astral, low causal. So that means almost through all the emotional to mental, high mental realm is the dragon realm. So these are only some of the realms that are starting to influence humanity. And I believe it's an incredible cosmic plan that this is happening right now. I remember with our institute, I was doing a summer camp for children and teenagers having breakthroughs, spiritual breakthroughs. And I was doing this about 15 years ago, and I was leading the children in a guided visualization to see what kind of being wanted to communicate with them. And their parents were there as well. And I thought most people would choose fairies and elves. I thought that because earlier in the week we had been doing some stuff with fairies and elves. And what was very interesting is after they finished the guided visualizations and I asked the parents, well, what did you get? They got all these elementals. And then I said to the children, and what kind of beings were you working with? Every child said dragons.
Is there a hierarchy? I mean, we've got the elementals, we've got the leprechauns, we've got higher beings, we've got dragons. Is there a hierarchy amongst them?
I think that if you think of the Christ, so humans, we are being influenced by the Christ consciousness. And because that's love, we're a planet of love. We're to evolve love. And Jesus, the Christ, is about love. So just like Jesus had 12 disciples, and they all had their own unique talents, I would say that, and there's Archangel Michael, who's the head of the blue ray, but then there are other angels that would work beneath Michael on that same ray of energy. So I believe that there is a hierarchy of consciousness that exists for all beings, and that it is continuous. So that as we rise to one level, we open up to other truths, other knowledge that maybe was not available to us.
That makes sense. So a hierarchy of consciousness, which is different from what I was asking about, which is a hierarchy of power. I mean, but it's a different kind of power, isn't it? So they're all here. They're all making themselves known and available to help humanity. Why?
Because of it's the timing. It's the universal intelligence, the creator of our particular galaxy. It's the universal timing that we're at a stage, the Earth is at a stage, humanity is at a stage in its evolution. The sun, our own solar system, which is a conscious being, it's not only Mother Earth, it's this sun is a conscious being as well, that we are at a stage where we can move to the next level of consciousness. And in this next level of consciousness, we will be able to communicate with all these different beings because we're rising into this astral level where they can talk to us. So the dragons, for example, as I was being told in the book, The Dragon's Tale, the dragons specialize because they're beings of earth, air, fire, and water. In other words, they've got all elements. They can catalyze the Kundalini energy. They can catalyze our Kundalini energy in us individually and the Kundalini energy of the planet. Before we went on air, we were talking about the dragon lines and how we even talk about the dragon lines on the earth or the ley lines. And these are the Kundalini energy lines of the earth. And so the dragons are here to help raise us. And humanity may say, my God, what a terrible mess we've made of the environment. And we are totally responsible for all the earthquakes and all the global warming and the volcanoes. And, we're terrible. Well, on one level, this may be true that we have been irresponsible. But on another level, this is so far beyond us, these cosmic changes that are catalyzing this for us, that we are only this small part of what is happening. And I believe what is going on, Sandy, is that as we rise to this next level of consciousness, humanity has to redress and correct all of our erroneous thinking and emotions, negative emotions, and actions that have caused what we humans have done. And that individually, you and I have our own work to do, looking at our own erroneous actions in this life or perhaps in other lives. I believe that this even comes to us. And correct this. So each of us has a responsibility because we're a cell in the collective of humanity, and humanity is a cell in the body of the earth. So that is our responsibility. And that's how each of us can help with this evolution of consciousness right now. So that's what we need to do.
There's one thing I'm curious about with regard to dragons, and that is that if they are a much higher consciousness, the be-all and end-all of everything is love.
Yeah.
If they are a much higher consciousness, do they experience love? Because everything we read about dragons is they're very egotistical.
That's a great question. And I think that their main gift is wisdom. We also hear about dragons that they're all knowing. And I believe their main gift is wisdom, and that in their wisdom, they are aligned to universal consciousness. So even if you look at masters, if you talk about great masters who we know, for example, you will see that one quality, either love, wisdom, or will be their main one.
Mm.
Now, to be full creators, we need to have very much a working knowledge of all three. However, each of us has more of one of these naturally than another. For example, I'm more wisdom than I am love, and yet my whole life I have worked on developing my love. And only in my later life, since the last 24 years of founding our institute, have I had to work with will. So if you look at yourself, which one is your strength?
I think mine is probably wisdom. It's that or will. I don't want to sound as if I'm devoid of all love. That's not true. But I do know that, I think it's will or wisdom.
Yes. So you see, and it's not that we are imperfect human beings. It's that we do value these other qualities, and that we are trying to grow them in ourselves, but that we have our natural gift. And I believe it's the same with masters. If you look at masters, you can see which ones are more love, which ones are more wisdom. And so dragons, more wisdom.
Yeah.
And then, of course, great power. And why would they be working with humans on the earth? Well, what are we a planet of? Love.
Yeah.
So in working with us and in service to us, they develop love.
Yes, because we tend to forget that it's a two-way street. They're getting something out of this too.
They are.
So, at this time of great, incredible cosmic changes, I think unlike anything perhaps that humanity and this planet has ever seen before, what is it that they most want us to take on board?
Do you mean the dragons, or do you mean
all of them? All of them. Yeah.
I think that we are meant to be, humans are meant to be co-creators. I believe that we are gods in training. We are gods in training, and we may only be kindergarten level, but that we're meant to become co-creators with universal intelligence, with spirit, with God, whatever you want to call it. And to do this, we have to become conscious. And so that if we just embrace this purpose and then make it our primary goal, to say, what in me is aligned to what I feel my soul is wanting, and what in me is not yet quite in line and it needs tweaking. And every day, tweak that. Every day, try to improve on that weakness. And this is how we can sign up. But it's not to feel that we're inferior or that we are less than, but to celebrate what we are and to tweak what we're not, that we participate in this journey to consciousness so that we can become what I believe humanity is to become, guardians of this wonderful planet. And working with elementals who are also on this wonderful planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think, Sandy? That is a question you asked me. What if I ask you that question?
I think that we are definitely on a journey back to something. I often feel that to a degree, we kind of devolved and now we're on the upward path, finding our way back to oneness, and, complete oneness. And I think that all of the other beings are probably doing the same, and some are further along than others. But, I don't understand what else we would be doing. It's got to be the only thing worth doing. Yeah.
Yes. And what if, as you mentioned earlier about the hierarchies, so that if we're evolving and we're moving up the rings of the hierarchies, and at one point we unite with the oneness. However, what if it doesn't stop, Sandy? What if it's a continual evolution of consciousness, and that as we, you and I, become more conscious, we are also affecting the consciousness of our Creator?
Yes. Yeah. And it's a never-ending journey.
Yes.
And so then you have to sit and wonder, how far can it go? To infinity and beyond. Yeah. Yeah. So in your International Institute for Transformation, is this what you are teaching students?
Yes. Yeah, it's very funny. I always think it's very funny that people often are attracted to me and they think, it's the Leprechaun lady, and we're going to learn all about cute little fairies and how to work with elementals. And then they meet me and they think, oh, it's all about transformation. It's all about consciousness. And it is all about transformation, and I love our elemental friends, but it's about so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. On your website, you offer a free spiritual transformation starter kit to
I
people.
do.
What would they find in there?
Well, hopefully they'd find out what their gifts are and where they've got to work. Yeah, it's one of these questionnaires that will help them assess their own spiritual intelligence, because we talked about mathematical intelligence or natural intelligence. You could have spiritual intelligence. And then you can look at, and where do I need to focus? What do I need to do more? Yeah.
And you're starting up a new course in the new year?
I am. It's called Visit Magical Realms, and it starts in January, and we are meeting once a month, once in January, once in February, and once in March. And we're studying 3 different books. We're studying these 3 different books to help people move to higher frequencies, to help them become more conscious. And the first book is called Good Morning, Henry, an in-depth journey with the body intelligence. And this is about our soul and an awakening to what our soul is saying we need to do next, but in a very concrete, practical, physical way. And then there's hybrids, so you think you're human. And this is going to allow people to look at the 22 possible hybrids they could be and to find out which one are they likely. And then there's the last book is on the dragons and what are the dragons trying to tell us and how can we work with them in this energy. Yeah.
Wonderful. What an invitation. I love the name of that course.
Visit Magical Realms.
Yeah. Who could resist? Who could resist?
Who could resist? No one.
No one. Tanis Helliwell, I'm afraid that we're out of time, which is such a shame because I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It has been such a treat, and I love having conversations with you, Sandy.
Thank you, Tanis. So, if you want to know about the Dragon's Tale, the Leprechaun story, Manifest Your Soul's Purpose, Decoding Your Destiny, you can go over to tanishelliwell.com, where you can learn all about these wonderful titles and more about her study courses, tours to sacred sites, and everything else. Tanis Helliwell. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another edition of What is Going On. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thanks again to Tanis Helliwell.